Okay, so for the last decade or so, it feels like Hollywood has had this one single obsession, the cinematic universe. I mean, ever since Marvel somehow pulled off the impossible, every single studio has been scrambling to build their own, dreaming of those endless billion-dollar blockbusters. But here's the thing. For every success story, there's a huge, huge graveyard of forgotten franchises.
So what's the deal? What is the secret ingredient for failure? Why do so many of these massive, ambitious, multi-million-dollar plans just crash and burn right out of the gate? Well, it turns out there are a few very common, very fatal mistakes that studios just keep making over and over again. And today, we are going to break down the anatomy of a universe killer.
So first, you got to understand the mindset at the time. Right after the Avengers hit it big, it was like a gold rush. Studio executives saw a literal blueprint for printing money, and the order came down from on high. Find some kind of property, any property really, and turn it into a universe.
The goal was simple, but man, was it ambitious. The idea was to create these epic sagas that could just churn out annual blockbusters, spin-offs, TV shows, the whole shebang. But the reality? Well, the reality was a whole lot messier. More often than not, these grand plans end up with just a single, lonely movie that killed the whole dream before it even had a chance to start. And that brings us to the first and, honestly, the most fundamental reason these universes just collapse. It is so painfully obvious you'd think they'd learn, but it's a lesson Hollywood just has to keep learning the hard way. You simply cannot build a house on a foundation of sand. And this right here is the original sin of trying to build a franchise. You get so caught up in planning what film 5 and film 6 are going to look like that you completely, totally forget to make film number 1 a compelling, entertaining, and just plain good movie all on its own. I mean, think about it. If the audience hates the first chapter, why on earth would they come back for a second?
And this graveyard is crowded, believe me. Just look at Universal's Dark Universe. It was supposed to be this huge, monster-filled competitor to the MCU, but it was dead on arrival, the second that 2017 The Mummy movie hit theaters. Critics called it astoundingly bad. The very same year, King Arthur Legend of the Sword was so hated that its planned 6-film saga just became a running joke. And the list goes on. You have movies like Bloodshot, which was called a deeply generic affair, and The Dark Tower, which got torn apart for looking cheap and having a boring story. These weren't launch pads, they were brick walls. But, sometimes the failure isn't so obvious right away. A movie can look like a huge hit on paper, but still be a total franchise killer. And there is no better example of this than The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Sony went all in on this thing. They were hiring writers for Sinister Six and Venom spin-offs months before the movie even came out. They were literally betting the farm.
And when you see this number, you can totally understand why they were so confident. Over $700 million worldwide. That should have been an automatic, no-brainer green light for everything they had planned. It looks like a massive success, right? But here's where you start to see the cracks. Domestically, here in North America, it barely scraped past $200 million. It was also way more front-loaded than any other Spider-Man movie. That basically means everyone rushed out to see it on opening weekend, but then word of mouth was so bad that people just stopped coming. The excitement, the buzz, it just wasn't there. And this really gets to the heart of it. Beyond the box office numbers, it just wasn't a good movie. It was this overstuffed mess that tried to do way, way too much, completely failing to juggle all its different subplots. It just didn't connect with audiences enough to leave them wanting more. And what happened? Less than a year later, the plug was pulled. Sony cut a deal with Marvel, and the entire Amazing Spider-Man universe was officially dead.
And that leads us perfectly into the second major universe killer, which is kind of like a close cousin to the first one. I like to call it the setup trap. And it is so frustrating because it basically poisons the movie from the inside out. This slide just illustrates the completely flawed logic perfectly. So the studio announces a massive universe. Then they make the filmmakers spend the entire first movie just laying the groundwork for the future, introducing a dozen characters, teasing villains, dropping little hints. And in the process, they forget the most important part, making the movie you are watching right now actually entertaining. It is putting the cart miles ahead of the horse. And this comparison is just perfect. The goal is to get us, the audience, super excited about this huge, incredible new world. But the reality is you're asking people to pay full ticket price for what is basically a 2-hour-long trailer. A trailer for sequels that, because the first movie was so unsatisfying, are almost certainly never going to get made. Yeah, this quote just says it all. The movie becomes completely obsessed with laying out every little detail of how a character gets their name or their mission, but it gives zero thought to actually creating immediate blockbuster fun. It's all homework and no recess. And we've seen so many victims of this trap. I mean, look at Snake Eyes' G.I. Joe Origins. It was supposed to relaunch a whole universe, but the main character didn't even put on his iconic costume until the final scene. Other movies spend the whole runtime just building up to a character finally putting on their classic outfit. You're literally withholding the one thing people paid to see. King Arthur did the same thing, saving a huge character like Merlin for sequels that never happened. Okay, so after looking at all these expensive, high-profile train wrecks, what are the lessons? What are the big takeaways from this cinematic graveyard for any studio that still dreams of building its own universe?
You know, it really boils down to just a few key mistakes. 1. You cannot build on a weak foundation. You just have to make the first movie great. 2. Stop prioritizing setup over the actual story. Tell a complete story now. 3. Stop misunderstanding your audience by holding back the cool stuff they came to see. And finally, 4. Stop assuming the franchise is a guarantee. You have to earn it, one movie at a time.
And as one final cautionary tale, even getting a universe off the ground is not a guarantee of success. The DC Extended Universe actually ran for a decade, but it ended with a total whimper. By the time Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom came out, everybody knew a full reboot was coming. The movie itself just felt like an afterthought, a totally forgettable swan song, proving that without a clear vision and real audience investment, even an established universe can just fade away.
Ultimately, building a franchise isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. You can't just jump to the finish line. You have to build trust with your audience, film by film. The huge question all these failures leave us with is a pretty simple one. After a decade of spectacular flameouts, has Hollywood finally learned how to pace itself, or are we just destined to keep visiting this graveyard of busted universes?